Okay, it is a couple minutes past 7, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. I'm Sarah Walker, the Walden Woods Project's Education Coordinator. Thank you so much for joining us for Thoreau and the Miracle of Poetry. For those that do not know us, the Walden Woods Project is a nonprofit based out of Lincoln, Massachusetts. We preserve the land, literature, and legacy of Henry David Thoreau to foster an ethic of environmental stewardship and social responsibility. Our organization was founded in 1990 by recording artist Don Henley, and last April we celebrated our 30th anniversary. Before we start, just to go over some Zoom housekeeping, even though everyone is surely used to this by now. This is a Zoom webinar, so you are only able to see myself and the panelists. Please use the chat function in the bottom of your screen if you're having any difficulties, and we'll do our best to help. You can also use the chat to correspond with each other more immediately. And there is a Q&A box to the left of the chat box. So during the last 20 minutes, we will open up to an audience Q&A. So feel free to post any questions throughout the event in the Q&A box, and we'll address them later. And tonight we are joined by 4 contemporary poets whose work responds to Thoreau's, often about nature, social reform, and living deliberately. The poets will read a few poems for about 10 minutes each, and then the 4 will ask each other questions about their work, and then we'll go to the Q&A with the audience. We also have our resident Thoreau scholar and author, Jeffrey Kramer, with us tonight in case there are any Thoreau questions during the Q&A. So we'll go ahead and get started. First up, we have Catherine Staples. Catherine is the author of The Rattling Window and Never a Note Forfeit. Her poetry has appeared in Gettysburg Review, Kenyon Review, Poetry, the Southern Review, Yale Review, and the Academy of American Poets. Honors include a Dakin Fellowship in the Sewanee Writers Conference and Southern Review's Guy Owen Prize. She teaches in the honors and English programs at Villanova University. Welcome, Catherine.
Oh, Sarah and Jeff, thank you so much for having me. And it's a delight to be reading in such good company this evening. There are a few New England transcendentalists and naturalists in my current manuscript, but Henry Thoreau is foremost. Henry lost his brother John, and that loss was a catalyst. You'll hear that in the first few poems. He turned to the fields and woods for solace and for science, and I followed his leads. This is called Beyond the Concord and Merrimack, and here is the epigraph, which was the muse for this poem. I long ago lost a hound, a bay horse, and a turtle dove, and am still on their trail. Partial wing of a horse's track on the path, disappearing in sand, reappearing in damp, where the wood thrush sang, crystal, lonely. The bayberry in gaps between trees. Remember that hound stepped from the wood, one quick shiver. He shook the wet flecks from his sides, turned toward us, deliberate, alert, bright as an island of moss. Who had he lost that he fell in with us, John? Stride for stride, lifting his head under our palms. It was winter, 8 years after you'd gone, clear as the register of cowbells on hillsides, an echo of copper, too rhythmic for a late cow returning, each rung bell quick then slow as she made her way. No, this was tink, tink, tink. We'd have made a day of it, searching for the boy who made the sound, for he was us. The young boy tinkering with the watermill, perfecting the hit of hammer, each wheel's revolution, water tripping a hollow music from a foot-wide rill swollen with melted snow. Late last night, I heard a hound striking a line. That night our hound left, 3 times up the mountain, twice down. Was it rabbit or fox? Next morning, before we broke camp, a lone mourning dove. Melodic, I called it. Naive, you teased, as we set the mosquito quid into the river. And when that hound was gone, what was it we'd lost? The clear space between trees, looking up through the heavens, the oars idle between us, the white lilies nearly open. June, you said, earlier than usual. After that, I tracked the blooms, John, each season, every one. This next one is a lyric reimagining of Thoreau's essay, Slavery in Massachusetts. It too is written in his voice, and I kind of imagined that he was on a walk on April 12th, 1851. Slavery in Massachusetts. Forked shadows of grass on the dry path. The meadow hardly breathes. I heard the wasps before I saw them high in the trees. If my brother were here, he'd say not right, the right thing, plain spoken, broad shouldered, clear. Would he were here to speak against Judge, Governor, and Webster, that devil of the law's maker, an innocent man, a fugitive law that sends the free Thomas Sims back to Georgia. Bluets, celandine, violets. What use is beauty? I thread my way through rustling oak and alder. There on the warm hillside of the cut, stigmas of hazel, crimson rays breaking from buds, like stifled cries from the hollow. I am halfway to the ponds, on foot, though I will not arrive in mind. The open air, the skit of wind on water, the free, bright light. They'll take him from jail to dock. Dark purple anthers of elm strew the way. Well, Henry, as like most of us, wasn't writing all the time. He had a day job, and he wasn't particularly wild about his day job. This borrows its title from Hesiod, Works and Days. With compass, chain, and plumb line, Thoreau surveys another farm. 3-4 days of it, incessantly, he adds, to catch the drudge of labor, dead even strides, sight lines, lengths. He squints to align the horsehair filaments in the eye of his compass with a burl in a pine. Casting lines in plain air, the accurate tensile pitch. He's not unlike a spider. Meadow, forest, swamp, each fluent gesture yields breadth and length. The spider's easy freehand, jeweled in rain, tossing in wind, closer than he thinks to surveyor's work. She turns and turns again, answers the call of black fly and gnat. Her art is her work. He's not so sure. Henry and the spider, born trespassers, setting up shop in other people's woods. His steady tramp in rain, the run of her weft against the warp. A task for him, a day for her. She's her own spindle, and he keeps pencils in his pocket. And then just two little short ones more. This next one is called Dear Henry. It's my favorite. It's sad, but Henry's brother, John, most of you may know, nicked himself shaving and died of tetanus. And strangely, Henry took on the symptoms of lockjaw for several days. Dear Henry, like Achilles smearing his face with soot, shearing his hair at the news of Patroclus's death, you too took a step to the world of the dead when your brother died. Bewildered, your jaw and limbs stiffened with his. Then it ended. Like floodwaters, it subsided. You were alive. His memory, a bright vein of quartz looping through granite, a glinting diagonal, unsullied and intact within you. Oblique, flashing. You leapt the Emerson stairs 2 at a time, rat-a-tat-tat of a stick on a railing, children lie capes in your wake. You found the first huckleberries, tamed the woodchuck, borrowed the axe, built the cabin, played your brother's flute. You drew the oars, then let them go. Dear invisible, dear true, with every endeavor, you held him close. You swallowed the long winter, and his lost vigor flew through you. Okay, and this last poem, it takes a title from one of Ralph Waldo Emerson's letters. It's a kind of mirror poem. So the first half, well, the first line, it gets echoed at the end. I think you might, and then it sort of folds on itself. You might hear some of those echoes. This poem is for my beloved brother, Paul Colello. The arrow of the angel had gone too deep. The deep wound of losing a brother, a perpetual ache in the shoulder's blade. The bare plateau where scapula might attach to coverts, if ever once we had wings. There at the ribs ledge, the severing plates, a hollow, a gouge, and ever after, a smoothed over scar. Just so, lichen scars a rock, blankets the hollow places where rain collects, ribs them in wings and florets, gray-green covers where algae and fungus thrive on bare rock, immune to heat and drought and sorrow, the perpetual ache in the shoulder's blade, the deep wound of losing your brother. Thank you.
Yay. Thank you, Catherine. Those were so beautiful. And I don't think the audience can see all the panelists clapping, but I'm sure everyone's clapping at home as well. Next up, we have David Leff. David is a poet laureate of Canton, Connecticut, and the author of 6 nonfiction books, 3 volumes of poetry, and 2 novels in verse. David recently co-edited New England Nature, an anthology of early nature and environmental writing, and is in the process of editing a gathering of poets on Henry David Thoreau, verse inspired by his life and work, scheduled for publication early in 2022. Welcome, David.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Good evening to everybody out there in Zoom land. I'm really honored to be here with these other poets and also in support of the Walden Woods Project. This is a great event. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to read a few poems that honor Thoros Encounters with nature, even though our relationship with the natural world has changed significantly since his time. But nevertheless, we share common experiences with nature, both physical and spiritual, scientific oriented and poetic. And so I'll try to speak to those. The first poem is, it's really a contemporary walk around the pond that he made famous. And oddly enough, it's called Walking Around Walden. I'm just another pilgrim, not sure what I'm seeking, sensing it might be here along this sacred shore. Passing a crowded bathhouse and beach of sunbathers where kids splash with shouts of joy, I enter a canopy of pine and oak, a path sunken in soil from generations of feet, and squeeze between wire fences like a cattle chute. I pass disciples and tourists, voices drowning chickadee chatter and lapping waves. Backstroking swimmers call to each other as they glide suspended by the slaty water where Henry sounded the long-lost Walden bottom to recover the depth of Earth's eye. At the house site, school children picnic, toss cairn stones, dashing my desperate hopes for a momentary life of quiet inspiration. Rarely do we find the pond of our dreams in a world of rippled surfaces and multiple reflections. But this glacial kettle Ganges still in spirits, and should I follow the drumbeat of my heart, however measured or far, I'd discover many Waldens. This is just the easiest to find. The Concord Museum has a pair of snowshoes that belong to Henry Thoreau that were made by Penobscot Indians. So I read this poem with those in mind. Snowshoes. The shoes remember the tree in a straight-grained, strong frame, flexing step after step, the wood slowly tempered by seasons, well-watered and dry, cold and sweltry. The shoes embody the hand and eye of the crafter, steam-bent, sanded smooth, lacquered to a sheen, and woven in a complex web of rawhide, time, and skill. The shoes imprint in soft powder with waffled snow angel feet. They crunch on icy crust. Always they leave an ephemeral track lodged longer in the mind than in nature. The shoes invite imagination. Conjuring animal totems from the woods, they leave behind elongated beaver tail, oval bear paw, narrow pickerel, and swallowtail shapes. The shoes know every step among spruce and leafless yellow birch, ground that's granular or mushy like mashed potatoes, frozen streams and steep slopes to windswept summits. The shoes harbor memories that rush back with but a glance at a pair of well-worn rackets. After last breaths, they hold our deep winter secrets, just as the shoes remember the tree. Now, spruce is a tree that's commonly mentioned in Thoreau's journals and certainly in the Maine woods and elsewhere. And in our day and age, plantations of Norway spruce, they're kind of an interesting commentary on what our relationship with nature is today. They're not an invasive, but they're not a native plant either. And the plantations that were planted, many by the CCC, are kind of they mediate between the wild and a garden, I guess. So this is called Spruce Cathedral in winter. Even at noon, the light is thin and dim among the towering Norway spruce, with their dour, downcast black-green needles. At least 7 stories tall with pointed tops like rockets ready to launch, I look up along the trunk through brittle, bony dead limbs to fragments of sky. Despite last night's powdery snowfall, the ground is only sugared in patches, crystals slowly sifting through a seine of stiff needles in breezes swaying the crowns, but not felt below in this darkling murkwood of lurking mystery. 8 decades ago, the muscular young men of Roosevelt's tree army planted a few acres of sunlit field in straight rows of tender, bare root seedlings, loosening grass-tangled soil with spades and dibble bars for plants whose survival seemed doubtful. Long forgotten, the spruces now stand like courthouse columns, crowded in soldierly file, umbrellas of crepuscular eternity. But I blink and look again, and now they seem slanted, arrayed in shifting diagonal lines that shimmer and fade. Perspective plays tricks with my eyes as the trunks lose their rhythm, seem to alternate space with each other until I feel inside a changing hyperbolic geometry, a dizzying Escher-like maze where one thing blends into another. Not wild enough for nature, defying a garden's tidy trim. These trees make mischief with my mind. Estranged from the ordinary, it is an encrypted landscape. They await saws, ice, or windthrow to renew cycles of growth with moisture and light. Now, Thoreau was quite adamant and spoke eloquently on the acquisition of too many things. And in this poem, I encounter what I call the poverty of plenty. And it begins, the title of the poem is Trash Blossoms. And it begins with an epigraph from, of all people, Arthur Miller from his play, The Price. And he wrote, "The more you can throw away, the more it's beautiful." So trash blossoms. Caught at roadside in drab, ragged early spring grasses are the season's brightest blooms, incandescent even in thready cloud-filtered light. Shards of blue, purple, and red plastic from broken toys and crushed bottles, wind-blown cereal and cracker boxes, candy bar wrappers, and potato chip bags in colors unknown to nature grow as sure as clover and dandelions. Sprouting each year as snowbanks rot away, I pick these tattered trespassers, remnants of the poverty of plenty, for the beauty of their absence. Lastly, I'll read a poem that I tried to think about Thoreau's spiritual relationship with nature. He didn't merely observe the natural world. He tried to be a part of it. So this is about that. It's called The Texture of Silence. A lichen-patched boulder is the texture of silence I long to emulate. I want to melt into the landscape, forget the surveyor and yield to the survey like oaks and pines, sparkling schist, red sandstone. I yearn to be camouflaged, an unseen sensation like wind on my cheek or the stream chattering in my ear. Distilled to an essence, I'd find a place where prayers expand forever like the invisible air I breathe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Those are awesome. Really made me want to go for a walk at the pond. And I know I told you all not to pay attention to the chat, but if you do want to peek, people are responding to your poems. Next up, we have Ernesto Estrella. He is a New York-based poet and educator. He is the author of Mouth Process in Timeless, and is currently finishing his first poetry collection in English, The American Heart. Ernesto has translated the works of Henry David Thoreau and John Muir into Spanish, and has written a number of books and articles on poetic theory and performance studies. He is a former Yale University professor of contemporary poetry. In 2021, he launched the Voice of Recovery podcast, which uses poetry and storytelling as a tool for wellness and mental health. Welcome, Ernesto.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Jeff, and everybody in the room and in the audience. I'm so happy that this is happening, and that I'm gonna share here today poems from the book. I'm almost done with it, The American Heart, which has a lot to do with Thoreau in its origin. And I'm gonna read 4 poems from that book, and we can start. The first poem, it's called Death of a Bird Tuner, and it's a very Thoreauvian poem, obviously. And I want to think that probably Henry David would have written this poem if he had lived a little longer, but he didn't. So I went ahead and did it. And if you're wondering what a bird tuner is, I hope the poem answers that, but I'm not sure. And if you've met one, maybe you know. So, Death of a Bird Tuner. These birds are out of tune, and poetry has no other mission than turning your nest upside down. The frequency and the repetition of words and silence inside this poem will determine if you get the job. A national bird tuner is born every year in the United States. They live in small little towns. If you scratch the map, you find them, and that's the only way. But fate has made a case against them, and there's no prizes, no grants for them. So they often die of train or rain and are pronounced deaf and buried by those that cannot wait in lines of poetry. I found an epitaph that told the story of one of them, a young girl that lived once on a book, and that is as far as she went. The grave was full of flowers. You didn't need to scratch this time, but her words were buried like she was buried behind collars. What the epitaph said, we have so much silence in common. So the second poem of the set, it's called Billy, and unfortunately it's not dedicated to Billie Eilish, but to Billie Holiday. And maybe they have something in common down the line. I mean, who knows? Billie Holiday is very important in my life. So, Billie. From the back, Billie Holiday was even more eternal. And she loved. She was not afraid. She was always afraid. In that threshold, she invented English words by putting them a little bit before or after the sentence had come into existence. A man is a woman from the back. A back, it is infinite. My back cannot caress your hair, and yes, I'm sorry that this took so long. The book, The American Heart, is divided on rounds like a boxing match. So there's 8 rounds. It's a short boxing match. And what I'm reading is mostly from the first round. And this following poem is important. It's called Heart. So it's essential for the book. And it actually contains the title of the book. Let's see if you guess where. Heart. My DNA cannot take one more human tick, tack, tick. Thanks, but I can't. One more drop of talk and I will small cave in. You were enough, my tick, think, tack, panther. I can't be without you. I thought that tick, there were tack other bodies, but they're not. I build my weight, you sell coffee, and still tick, you attack my love, your gentrifying hand of gentle touch that called me from the bed that afternoon. I will get the grammar straight, and I will train my lips to tick, kiss, tack, you took my American heart. And the last one, it's from round 6 in the book. And round 6 deals with the beautiful moment of entering the United States of America, which if you were born here, you're missing out. And you know what happens when you're going to meet all these beautiful people that are, keeping the gates of America safe, right? So it's a strong identity moment. where, you know, I don't know if they're defending yours. It's a beautiful, beautiful situation. So in round 6, I have a couple of poems that are about this moment of entering into the country, right? It's a little more theatrical than the other ones. Entry, variation 2. You've had problems with us before, right? What do you mean? I told the woman. Listen, I came here to get rid of my poetic record. The rest is dinosaurs, and you don't look like Steven Spielberg. You know I could have you arrested for that. Officer, I have not even seen Jurassic Park. That was just a filler. What? I could really have you arrested for that. Now, how long are you planning to remain without watching Jurassic Park inside this country? I was scared, so I knelt down and I looked at her with eyes of high defense. And then I read her hand in my mind as she held my fingertips against a new light and predicted that I would have a brilliant future if only I could manage to control my metaphors. Thank you very much.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, Ernesto. And last but not least, we have Quinton Collins. Quinton is a writer, editor, and Solstice MFA program assistant director. His work has appeared or is forthcoming in Sidereal Magazine, Superstition Review, Glass Poetry, and elsewhere. His first full-length collection of poems, The Dandelion Speaks of Survival, is forthcoming from Cherry Castle Publishing in 2021. Recently, he won the Charles B. Wheeler Poetry Prize. The winning manuscript, Claim Tickets for Stolen People, was chosen by Judge Marcus Jackson and will be published with the Ohio State University Press. Welcome, Quinton.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to Jeff and to the Walden Woods Project for the invitation, and thank you to my fellow readers. I love getting the opportunity to sit and listen to everyone. So I'm going to read a few poems from each of the books, and as I was thinking about the event and kind of the ethos of it, I wanted to look at things that hit an intersection of place, relation with the natural world, and how that also ties into the body and politics. So this first poem is called Why Just Say I'm from Chicago. Ask me where I'm from, and I'll tell you metro trains ripple through detached home corridors into downtown Chicago. That fistful full of potholes, soiled napkins, taxi cabs, excuse me, the bucket boy who beats a pulse. A peripheral whisper, that's where I'm from. The edge where deer herds dip into protected forest. It sounds beautiful until the first time the city claps fireworks into your chest, riddles you with blues, rock, rap, jazz every summer. You too would hop a train, ache like a pack of teens who hope to quench their bodies in Lake Michigan. The city shakes every bone more than spring tornadoes swivel the suburbs. That same wind scooped a 2x4 off a skyscraper, still skeleton naked in the loop. That board slapped a window to shards. Glass glitter rained down, caught sunlight, cast a glimmer, brighter than any star that winks a long past death in the suburbs. And this next poem is called The Water I Come From. Say my daddy never taught me to swim. Say I saw the Atlantic, went searching for humpbacks, like bodies flung off a bow. Say they break water. Say wet. Say flood in my basement asserts how high water will rise to kill me. Say Brandon never came home. Say their name on the ocean floor. Say saltwater ate my ancestors' bones. Say slave skulls slap East Coast shores in king tides. Say I steep in these waters. Say I never stop drowning. This next poem is called What Waves Will Carry Back to You. New water in my mouth, I rise as you and yours dismantle the planet. Another Starbucks plastic cup in my cheek. Another whale watcher searches for what wonders breach my surface. I hold America's history in my waves. Tall ships roped at the docks, bodies chained at the neck, on my tongue, British tea. I drank that revolution. Now commuter ferries dock in my teeth. I could dredge bones, lay skulls at State and Atlantic. Would you auction off a femur? A souvenir for your children to clutch on their duck boat tour? For now, a Coke can. A plastic straw I spit at Rose Wharf, a king tide. My waves return what you discard. And this next poem is called Petrichor. Rain wraps the air unit. Hi-hat or timpani, each drop drums the metal. This percussion persists. Now thud. Now stumble, now tumble into a drum roll. This storm wails too. What a thing to imagine, a scream we crave, earth with its mouth wide, each boom a hum in the windows. Then the drum again. The rain eases. Each drop once more patters like an infant's footsteps down the hall. Hands on the wall, thunder slaps against the paint, a giggle like the sun peeling back storm clouds. Lightning flickers a final goodbye. Then Petrichor, a memento of the storm's passing, lingers. This poem is called The Bees Rebuild. Today we build a new home. The old hive foam smothered, bodies dropped, writhed, but today new honeycombs to nest our young, collect honey. Some twitched for days. We move on, restart. Dandelions bloom. Everything burned last time. Everything fluorescent in sunlight. We rebuild today. We gather pollen. Before that, it was a hose. We sting. Yes, we sting. We sting only once, only carefully. We know we will die if we sting. They swat, we sting. Today, we build a new home. If we can save what we love, what is death? We sting. Some days on peony petals, we nap because we are tired. We tire of how they swat. We sting to protect. Maybe if we didn't sting, maybe if we didn't fight, we sting, but only to protect the hive. Last time, everything burned, but not before they scraped honey from our home. Some bodies burned. Today we restart. Today we rebuild our home. At sundown, what poison will douse these honeycombs? What fire? What else can we do but sting? And this poem is called How We Work the Soil. Our fingers latch to earth to coax this country stolen to growth. We manifested your destiny shoulder deep in dirt. Our wrist anchored in soil, we could not unhinge our limbs from this land. Bodies prostrate for cotton or God. You don't want testimony of your wrongdoing. Nestled in trenches we till, we raise the volume on our speakers. This land hums. Our roots steeple sidewalks. Sage blooms in our gardens. And this poem is called the Afro speaks of beauty. I am a nexus of naps, a cosmos of coils. I am a crown, a corona for a face, my circumference, a glow like a halo. I emanate light. My strands, curls, kinks, glint like gems nestled in gold. My volume erupts from a scalp, flares from a hairline, waves to the wind. I am the Afro, the Angela Davis, your daddy's hair in the 70s, your mama's hair in the 70s, the Cornell West, the setting sun that radiates twilight, the dawn to a blossom of light, a star in bloom. And I'm going to finish with the title poem from my first book, The Dandelion Speaks of Survival. When they see me rise, a nebula of corona, sunburst spires strewn among their bluegrass lawns, they will come for me. When my roots fan a maze around their chrysanthemums, interlace a cage around their petunias, grab the life I am so often denied, they will come for me. They will come for me when I yawn from a driveway fissure, when my leaves sprawl across their gravel beds. They will come with hands clenched, garden shears to snap their jaws, weed whackers to split my body, chemicals that wither and disintegrate me. They will come with mower blades sharp, thunder of gasoline combusting in the engine. They will come with tillers and hoes and rakes and knives and torches. Don't they know that when the wind rocks my halo, I cast seeds into the sky? I clutch earth tighter than any English bluebells. I survive their hands and their instruments. I survive every way they spill my bitter milk. I survive, I survive, I survive, I survive again and again. When they sharpen new tools, arm themselves with professional grade sprays, call landscapers to scrape out my existence. Call me weed, call me nuisance, call me pest. Say I am not welcome. Poison this soil to stunt my growth. Know that I will survive. I spring forth a field of gold. My petals kissed by morning dew, I bloom like the sun spills over the horizon. I stretch my stem and my roots beyond all borders. I split their concrete and this earth. Thank you.
Awesome. I think we can unmute to clap, everyone, if you want. That was really amazing, Quinton. Thank you. And thank you all so much. I didn't really think that deeply about the order, but I think it was a really great order. The poems responded to one another in a really unique way. So now we're going to do a little bit of a round robin craft discussion amongst the poets. It sounds confusing if I explain it, but they know what they're doing. So first we're going to have David is going to kick us off and ask Catherine a question about her work. Catherine will answer and then continue on. So you can go ahead and ask your question, David. And sorry, 1 second before, after this, we're going to have an audience Q&A. So I already see some questions coming through, but just a reminder to folks to type those into the Q&A box. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Catherine, I have a little bit of an advantage because I read 3 of your Thoreau poems in the most recent issue of the Concord Saunterer, and I really enjoyed them. And the first one you read tonight is the first one in this volume of the journal. And I wanted to ask you, you do a lot of poems in Thoreau's own voice, as well as in your own voice. And I was wondering, how do you slip into that voice of Thoreau? Is it a kind of channeling? What makes a Thoreau poem, a Thoreau voice poem, different than the other poetry you write?
Oh, unmute yourself, Catherine.
David, that is such a great question. And there's so many voices in Thoreau. And one of the really, when I first started thinking about Thoreau, it was Jeff Kramer's introduction in to the journals, in which he highlighted that Thoreau has this, he says, I don't want to speak in the voice of the clodhopper, the everyday. I want to elevate myself to myth. And I think what's really interesting in Thoreau is he kind of erases some of the personal suffering. So I was driven to write the brother poems partly because we don't hear so much of his missing John. I mean, not 4 months after John died, he said, surely joy is the condition of life. And I was, I don't know if I'm answering this, but I was spurred to, I think partly by thinking about my own brother, to write that poem about that first one. And I was also spurred by the whole question of the, I long ago lost a hound, a bay horse, and a turtle dove. I think we're the four of us poets. That's a metaphor. And what is it a metaphor for? It's not that there might not be something literal there, but I kind of felt those were the lost days that Thoreau was trying to conjure, lost adventures with his brother. And so the voice, I don't know, my voice comes up out of the crack between some of the gaps in what Thoreau says and what he doesn't say, because there's such a difference in the journal voice versus, say, Walden. I don't know, Jeff, if you want to chime in there.
Thank you, Catherine.
I think you're doing fine there. So,
David, thank you for that great question.
Well, thank you for your wonderful poems. I enjoyed reading these in the Concord Saunter, and listening to your voice express them kind of stimulated me to ask that question. Actually, I kind of snuck in 3 questions, but.
Okay, Catherine, you are asking your question to Quentin.
Quentin, you read the first 2 poems of yours that I had typed out because I love them so much. So thank you for that. I was just so struck by the music of your lines and by the sonic weave of alliteration and rhythm and repetition. You're just a genius for repetition. I love that poem about, say, I saw the Atlantic, search for the humpbacks, say wet, say flood. And I was just curious if you could talk about that music and maybe the influences. I wondered if there was actually a particular music or particular influences that helped to bring that music out in you. And here's my sneaky second question. How much of your process is oral?
Thank you, Catherine. Those are really good questions. I came to poetry by chance. And in my earlier time of writing in high school, a lot of my inspiration was actually hip hop. I listened to, I think it was at the time when Lupe Fiasco was a very new artist in Chicago. And it was at the time where he wasn't as well known everywhere else, but because I was, a local kid in the suburbs, I got to consume a lot of his music before the rest of the world. And like one of the things he does is he's very big on wordplay, and usually his wordplay involves at least 3 things being stacked on top of each other in one lyric. And there's a lot of sound that goes with it too. So I spent a lot of time trying to replicate that sense of wordplay and also making it sound, great. And then when I first got into like a formal sense of like, all right, I'm a poet now. Like you have to take this seriously. You're a poet. Slam poetry was, it's an amazing thing for, access. And one of the biggest things I remember is when I was an undergrad, my first mentor, Mark Turcott, started the class for creative writing like 101 was to play Reggie Gibson's For James Marshall Hendricks on Def Poetry Jam. And through our conversations later, he was like, hey, I understand like why you like slam so much. let's help you write better so you can do that. He's like, you can do that fine. You just need to learn how to write better to do it. So I haven't really lost my ear for it. There are some poems I have where I very much am striking all the music depending on the content, but also there are times where I'm thinking about it in different ways. So depending on the kind of poem, especially when there's a sense of reverence to it or a sense of energy, I like to have a lot of music to it. But other times I might be thinking about things about how are like the phonemes sounding. So I think of those winter Sundays and how the
Yes.
sound changes in that poem. Sometimes I'm thinking a little more targeted in that manner. So that's, you know, the biggest thing. And in terms of my process as far as writing, I actually spend a ton of time reading aloud these days. I just can't not because I like to hear it. And it's nice to hear the places where things stop. And with these two manuscripts, I've been, you know, pushing the publication. I've been doing it a lot where I've been just reading the whole thing aloud. And there's a certain joy to it. There'll be things that after reading my poems 50 times, I'll hate because I've read them 50 times. But I luckily will say I've come to always appreciate what I did with the sound, even if I purposefully didn't make sound, if it's a non-noisy poem.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I was curious about the hip hop. I was thinking that was there.
That's awesome. Those are great questions. And now I forgot where we were. Quentin, you're asking your question to Ernesto.
Yes. So Ernesto, one of the amazing things I found when I was just like reading so much more about you, outside of this awesome video of you reading poetry at Bowery in like 2011, which is cool. You know, there's a bit where you talked about connecting like the poetry of the past with the contemporary. And I know that, you know, as you're working on this book of poems in English, you talked about the idea of your chapter or your sections being set up as a boxing match. And of course you have Billie Holiday in there. So as you're kind of working into this idea of, you know, the American heart, what are some of the images that you would say are like you're reaching back toward as an ancestry toward these poems that you're creating?
Well, yeah, thanks. That's a good one. As you can imagine, I have no roots in America other than the ones that I create myself. So my roots go back a lot into music, and so there's voices that appear in, I think, round 5 are letters from Americans to me, and there's people like Emily Dickinson, you know, Billie Holiday, Charlie Parker, Muhammad Ali. A lot of Black artists come up there because me, you know, being a musician, that has been, you know, a strong presence. It's not something intended; it just happened like that, you know. But honestly, this book, which is basically finished, it's more of a, I cannot say who I am in the poem or where I come from. Like, it wouldn't be true, but it's more of a expose myself to figure out who I am and how I connect the dots on that heritage and that doubtful and careful connection with a place that it's not where I come from originally, right? So it's a difficult one.
Thank you for that.
Thanks. And Ernesto, you are asking your question to David.
David, I really I felt like when you were reading, I was, you know, the territory of Thoreau was spreading a little more. and I was I like that. And you're talking to someone that had to translate, you know, almost 800 pages of a journal of Thoreau. So I still like that. And your poem on the fabric of silence really touched me, and it was a very specific question, which I guess you thought about. It's a musical question, you know. Were you thinking about John Cage when you wrote the poem? Is there any musical connection in there, or is it just, you know, coincidence?
Well, as far as music is concerned, I'm an omnivore, and I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. I can't play an instrument, but I love listening to music of all types. And you know, I'm familiar with the work of John Cage, including his silent piece, but I really wasn't thinking about that when I was writing it. What I was thinking about was the feeling I get in the woods when I just seem to fade into the background of trees and boulders, whatever is around me. And it's a kind of a strange experience, but and nothing that I consciously have an intention for. But I was trying to express that notion of becoming part of the natural world that is around me.
It worked.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for doing your homework so brilliantly. I feel like this could keep going on, but we will turn it over to the audience now, who are already asking questions. So I'm just going to hop right in. First question is actually for you, Jeff. Did Thoreau have any favorite poets or poems that you know of?
He didn't really. So I saw that question come up, and I was thinking about it a lot while I was waiting for that to answer that. And strangely, he was very well read, but no poet or poem actually shows up any more than any others. So I have to say, no, he didn't really have a favorite poet, didn't have a favorite poem.
Okay, well, maybe he would love these poets today. The next question is for everyone pretty much. I'm hearing a lot of the poets discuss music. Is that where your initial writing started and turned to poetry, or how much do you see your poems as music? So we'll start with Catherine, and then I'll move down and out.
That's a really good question. I think for me, I find that if I hit the right musical opening line, it's almost like a tuning fork. And once I hear the music of that first line, then it brings everything else along with it. I am very much in love with the music of syllables, and sometimes I like to play with form and rhyme, internal rhyme, and so forth. Yeah, so the tuning fork of the first note of the music is very strong. And I would just say one more thing, which is that my father had a beautiful tenor voice, and all my life I've tried to write in a way that might somehow capture something of the music of his voice.
And David, do you want to answer that?
Sure. First of all, I've never taken any kind of formal class in poetry or creative writing in college. I've kind of just learned by reading. I find that reading and writing for me are reflexive activities. But I grew up in a period of time when artists like Bob Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel and Peter, Paul and Mary were emerging, and I was exposed to them and others at a very young age, because when I was in third grade, my mother went back to college and eventually became a college professor, and she would bring home all this music that someone of who's 10 or 11 might not otherwise be exposed to. And the musical rhythms of that era combined with very poetic language, I think was the germ of my interest in the way words work together to express more than their meaning, to express music itself. So a rhythm, something that captivates beyond what the language engenders to tell you.
And Quentin, I can repeat the question if anyone wants me to.
You know, I wish. I wish I had some background in music formally. I played flute for a week in grade school before I got banned from band. From, as the teacher said, I was banned from band for not doing homework because I was in band practice and didn't know about the homework. As a sixth grader, the idea of asking what the homework was when you come back didn't compute to me. So that was as far as I went. But I mean, the nature of hip hop was just so pervasive. I mean, there's every day in high school, you know, you have like guys who are freestyling in like the lunchroom or in the hallways or in gym. And the thing is, that's what I don't know if I would say I want to really be into hip hop or if I want to be a rapper at some point, but it's like a pervasive culture. And I think that there was no way I couldn't, want that and want some skill in it. And the thing is, like, as much as I enjoyed it, I mean, freestyling was just never something that came to me. You know, I can write amazing stuff, but like, I can't just, all right, it's your turn now, start rapping. But the thing is, being a writer, you always invent these scenarios in your head. So, I would afterward invent like this crazy like set of lyrics that I would have said had I like been able to freestyle. And I actually have a whole poem about it in my first book, where I'm essentially writing the freestyle that never was because I just am not able to do it. But I mean, I would say that my ear for it has evolved around how the words are working and less around the sounds. I mean, I enjoy a lot of music. I enjoy from a lot of different genres, but I can't say that I ever find myself having that same kind of ear when listening to songs as I do when I'm reading someone's poems. Usually when I'm even listening to readings, my head is usually like bouncing with, how the sound is moving. And it's just, I don't know, it's just such an enriching and different experience. And I just still someday would hope that maybe I'll learn to play an instrument and do that. But yeah, never.
Great. And Ernesto.
Yeah, I'll bring the guitar, Quentin, next time.
Yeah, you can take lessons.
But by the way, I was still thinking about Quentin's question. Bob Dylan is another of the curators of my American Heart, along with the Reza from the Wu-Tang Clan. So all these people come out there, I just don't think backwards, I was thinking forwards. So music, I work on voice. So anything that I do starts with a rhythmic idea very often. And I think this book, it really started as a melody, as a conversation with a certain voice that I did not really recognize. It just came to me actually in Chicago while I was on a train, riding a train, after seeing the amazing American Writers Museum. The voice started to come like a little song, and then I started to write the poems in my phone, and then there's a lot of rhythm and you hear like the American Heart, the Heart poem, the tic-tac, all those rhythmic ideas interest me a lot. And I guess they come even when I do a straight normal reading, meaning something that's not connected to music or sound, which is what I've done more often than these normal readings.
And I'm going to stay on you, Ernesto. We have a question for you. When you translated selections from Thoreau's journal, did you translate some of the poems from the early notebooks?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Cool. And question, I think for you, Jeff. Was Henry familiar with Act 2, Scene 1, where teachings and trees, books and brooks, sermons and stones? Do we have any idea about Thoreau and Will?
Yeah, I mean, Thoreau loved Shakespeare and quoted him very often. I don't think there's any essay or book by Thoreau that does not have a reference to something in Shakespeare. So yeah, Thoreau was very well read, and I would say that Shakespeare was certainly an influence. Again, it's not like a favorite poet like we mentioned earlier, but definitely he would have known that and probably responded to it.
Awesome. And a question for Ernesto and Quinton. After listening and watching Amanda Gorman and now seeing the two of you use your hands in simple gestures, are poets becoming more willing, do you think, to gesture with hands and fingers? So
Hmm.
kind of a performance aspect. Ernesto, you maybe start. And then we'll go to Quinton.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm Spanish, so we do that all the time. She comes from that, tradition of slam poetry, spoken word, and she feels very nuanced and very subtle. Those people that do it like way stronger. So I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be a trend, but she has a lot of symbolic power in her hands and a very scary responsibility, I would say. It was a big challenge that she came out there, and I think she's a little bit like Obama at the beginning of his first term, a lot of symbolic power on if she's crossed by poetry, and she could do a lot, and I'm pretty sure it's overwhelming for her at these moments. So yeah, she can do whatever she wants, with her hands. It was just amazing.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to agree with that. I think that people who are hesitant to use their hands always will be. I don't know if there's really going to be a change in that. I mean, I move my hands a lot more than you can see in this format because I'm sitting. So most of it's happening below where the computer is sitting on the stand in front of me. And it's just a natural thing for me because like the poem is speaking, like I'm doing it again, I'm doing it like right now, like my hands are doing the thing. And it's, if anything, I would say from her example, people learn how to really feel into their poems more when they're reading them, or like, okay, learn's maybe not the word I want to use. If they feel more emboldened to use their permission to lean into their poems more when they're reading them, if they felt hesitant before, I think that's great. I mean, we have these platforms where, for a lot of people, poetry isn't in front of them all the time. And this is like the one time that some people will really pay attention to poetry. And, if that's what they see a person who allows themselves to really get into it and let the poem move their body, right? Like, I feel like it's no different than when you're writing the poem. The poem's kind of, writing you versus you writing the poem. Or someone mentioned earlier in a Twitter question I posed was like, they're trying to translate the truth that the poem has out into the world. Like if the poem does that to your hands while you're reading, that's a great thing, and if the poem doesn't, that means that the poem maybe doesn't need you to move your hands. So yeah, I don't know if it's really going to have as much of an impact, but I would encourage anybody, if your poem when you're reading it makes you want to do something, like, do it, let the poem guide you.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So 2 more questions. We'll start. I'll start with this one. Is there any advice you give to someone who is interested in starting to write poetry? I'll start with you, Catherine.
I'd probably say the same thing that Emerson said to Henry. Do you keep a journal? I mean, I think a journal is a great place to start, and I think you just want to fall in love with some poets. Find someone whose work you really like. Go on to. There are so many magazines that are now have a really great online presence, and I think you want to write good poetry. You need to read well. And I think if you keep a journal, and in that journal, you just kind of play around with writing down some of the stuff that you really love, and then just taking walks and noticing. I mean, one of the great things about Henry Thoreau is that you can't look at his journals and not want to take a walk and notice things and go back to the same places again and again and see these incredible changes. It's like it's really getting to know the earth to take the kind of walks that he took. So I'd keep a journal, I'd read, I'd take walks, and I think looking at Henry's journal entries is a great place to begin, and imitate those, and then see what happens.
Great advice. And David.
I agree with Catherine. I think one must read widely and read deeply. And the more poets that you're exposed to, the more likely that you are to be inspired. You don't even have to like all the poets you read, but you can learn things from all of them. And, if you can, spontaneously generate poetry, without reading, well, more power to you. But I think your poems will be better, more rewarding to you and to readers the more widely read you are. Contemporary poets, ancient poets, 19th century poets, everyone. And what Catherine said about keeping a journal is absolutely correct. I've kept one since 1978, and it's close to 2 million words, I estimate. And a lot of it is some of the worst writing I ever did. And some of it is some of the best writing I ever did. But I quarry a lot of both my prose writing and my poetry from that journal, or at least from a germ or a seed that's planted in that journal. So I think Catherine's advice is the same advice that I would give. And just to riff on the previous question a little bit about the use of hands, I must admit that sitting and being in a rectangle on a screen, I find so confining, because when I read poetry at a live event, I'm moving all over the place. I drive people who are trying to video record crazy, but it's hard to do that without, like, on Zoom, without knocking over your microphone or some other thing. So I try to keep my hands at bay. But what Quentin and Ernesto said about the rhythm kind of almost infecting you and generating a spontaneous movement like you were dancing is very much to the point. And that's one of the limitations that a video, a Zoom event has. It's wonderful because otherwise we might not have any events. But when we get back to live events, I urge that all the people who want to be poets go out, not only read deeply, but go out and listen and watch. That's the way you're going to learn poems. And I'm someone who never had any formal education in poetry, but I'm writing all these poems for good or for ill.
Yeah, definitely something to look forward to. In-person poetry readings, hopefully around the corner. Quinton.
Sure. I would say, 100% agreeing and want to emphasize what has been said before. I think the reading piece is big, and the going out and listening piece that David mentioned is huge. Go to readings, go and sit and listen, and go to readings for poets whose work you didn't like, because you're going to experience it differently if you get to hear them read it, and maybe it'll help you understand it better. But the only other thing I would contribute is, discover your curiosity. Matthew Zapruder's Why Poetry has this very brilliant but hindsighty thing that I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. And I don't know why no one has put this in words for me before in my years of having poetry education in grade school to now, is the only thing you need to read and enjoy poetry is a dictionary. And it made me remember how much time I used to spend looking up words I had never heard before just so I can stick them in a poem, even if it made absolutely no sense for the language. I was like, okay, ennui sounds so cool. I just need to stick ennui or magnanimous in a poem. And the thing is, it's that curiosity to figure out what language can do that kind of drove me. And I think that when you discover that, it helps with your reading too, right? Because you don't want to get through a poem and just stop at, okay, I didn't particularly love this one, or I didn't particularly get this poem. Because even in contemporary poetry, you're going to read some stuff where you're just like, I don't get it, or it's very lyrical, so I have no idea of the dramatic situation that's happening here. And that curiosity is going to make you say like, well, hey, hang on, maybe I want to like Google a few of these words, and maybe I'll see that they're doing something with the language, and the language is influencing the sound, and maybe I actually need to read this out loud to understand a little more about what's happening. So ask questions, and I think that's one of the things we talk about with students at Solstice in terms of how they're doing their work is ask questions. We're thinking about what's the thesis of this thing, but it comes from this place of curiosity to understand more about the stuff you're reading, and it becomes like so much less of an assignment once you get like halfway into your MFA and you're just like, oh man, I enjoy everything I'm reading so much more than I already did because I'm asking so many more questions. So I think that no matter what form of study you have or where you're at, just don't stop asking questions about what the work is doing.
Awesome. Ernesto.
Let me go out of silence. Yeah, I think you guys have covered the reading part. So I'm going to follow up a little bit on what Quentin said on the inspiration. A very specific advice, because sometimes we don't know, especially when you're studying, if you are writing a poem or not, or what did you write? What is that, right? Not meaning like if it has lines or not like. So my own measuring stick is it's a line from a Peruvian poet, major figure for the Latin American and any poetries written in Spanish, called César Vallejo. He's translated initially. So he has a line at the beginning of his poem that says, "Mi madre me pone el abrigo encima, no porque nieva, sino para que empiece a nevar." In native English, my mother puts, my coat on my shoulders, not because it's snowing, but so that it would start to snow, or so that it starts to snow. So if your poem is transforming in some way your reality, it's bringing a new idea, or it's putting a new idea in a new light, and it's bringing some, this little splash of energy into your day for you and whomever reads it, maybe, then that's probably a poem, because otherwise it's a description of reality. And that's great. I mean, we have to describe reality too, but the poem enters reality and provokes this little, fault, broken terrain that you trip over that, and that you fall in the poem, and meaning that, and once you're inside the poem, it's an axiomatic experience, like mathematics. You don't leave, the space of the poem unchanged. When you come back to reality, it's a different reality. So for me, yeah, if it's a good thing to figure out, okay. And when you read something and you think it did that click, and then you read it a couple of days later and you're like, well, yeah, maybe yes, maybe not. But when there's something that has happened there that has, like I was saying in one of my points, I could talk about, okay, my American heart. I fell in love with an American person, okay, with America, or with Thoreau, which all of those were true. And I could write about it. Now, if I just finished saying, I will train my lips to tick, kiss, you took my American heart, then everything changes. And I just added a TikTok there. So technically it's pretty simple, but it really changes the way I relate to that experience of someone giving me a heart, for example, instead of just, describing it or talking about my relation to the States. So yeah, just, put your coat on or write poems or songs so that things happen to you. I think that's a very good way to see, to create territory, as we've been hearing, everybody with very different voices. Amazing ways of creating new terrain of a reality that we're maybe familiar or maybe not. So
awesome. I think that's a great question and answer to leave off on. I know I didn't get to some folks' questions, but maybe we'll just have to have everyone back in person sometime soon. A lot of people are asking about the poet's work. I will keep the event on our website live. All of their websites are on the event page. So if you go to our homepage, scroll down, you'll see the event, click it, and then the poets' bios and their websites will be there. And thank you all so much. We had a really big crowd for this event, and it's so appreciated. I know there's a lot of Zoom things happening now, so we really appreciate your time. And we are a nonprofit. If anyone feels inclined to make a donation, you can do so at walden.org. With that being said, we got a lot of donations for this event, so if you have already donated, thank you once again. And with that, thank you to the poets mostly. This was an amazing event, and looking forward to reading your work. 2 of you have new books coming out very soon, so looking forward to reading those. And you're all on mute, so I can't hear you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. This was
Thank
very
Thank you,
good.
Sarah, Jeff,
Yeah.
and David, Ernesto, Quentin. I mean, it's just been
Yes.
so much fun getting to know you. And Sarah, thank you for letting us have that little welcome session at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
It's been such a joy. Thank you for inviting us, Jeff and Sarah.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
And thank you to our listeners. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
Yes.
you're
Thank you,
marvelous.
thank you.
And for folks asking, this is recorded. I will put it up on the website by the end of the week. So some were asking for the actual poems you read, but if they listen back to the recording, they can get those. And I know you said a lot of them were in your books too, so they can find them there as well. So thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Good
You too.
night.
Good night.